In this video, we're going to review different chart types in Data Studio and see how we can use them to tell different stories with data. Hi, this is Ahmed from Siawak with another lesson from Google Data Studio Essentials. In this lesson, we're going to see what's possible in Google Data Studio in terms of data visualization. And what kind of charts and graphs do we have access to communicate data exactly the way we want to the end user of the report. We're going to review each chart type with several examples. We're going to learn how and when to use it and learn about data visualization best practices. In this first part, we're going to learn about table, scorecard, time series, area chart, and bar chart. Let's go ahead and get started. The first and simplest chart type is a scorecard. Scorecards are good for showing numbers, for showing KPIs. And by KPIs, I mean key performance indicators. With a scorecard, you can show a number, you can show a compact number, you can show a ratio or a percentage, and you can show a currency amount. Also, with the scorecards, we have the option to compare the values with the previous period. So we can see how much the number or the ratio has changed compared to the previous period of time. We can see the percentage of the change, or we can see the change in the absolute numbers. Another cool feature of the scorecard is the ability to apply conditional formatting. So for instance, here I've said that if the commerce conversion rate is less than 2%, I want the background of my scorecard to be yellow. And here I've said that if the revenue is more than $2,000, I want the background to become green. We can set multiple criteria for a single scorecard. So we can set it to become green for more than $2,000, or become yellow for less than $1,500, or become red for less than $400. That's it for the scorecard. Let's move on to the next chart. Tables. Everyone knows tables. Tables are good for summarizing data in rows and columns. Dimensions, they appear in rows, and metrics appear in columns. We also can see the grand total at the bottom of the table, and we have the option to paginate the table, so see the next and previous pages of data. But that's not all of it. Tables in Data Studio have some more styling features that help us visualize data differently and communicate different stories with our data. So for example, instead of showing numbers in the simple way, we can apply a heat map to a column so we can easily spot the largest and smallest numbers in that column. We can also choose to show the numbers in a column with the small bars. This not only helps us see the largest and the smallest values, but it can also help us to compare the values more easily. So for example, these three rows, they have about the same shade of green. So without looking at the numbers, we cannot be sure which one has the highest value. But here, when we are applying small bars to this column, we can immediately see that this row has the largest value. When we are using bars to visualize data, we can also apply a target line. Here, I've applied a target line at 5,000. So we can quickly see which rows are below the target and which rows are above the target. Another nice feature of tables in Data Studio is that we can apply conditional formatting. So for example, here, I've set the criteria that if a row is for a new visitor, the background color for the whole row would be light green. And if the revenue is more than $300, the font color of the whole row to become green. But then if the revenue is less than $200, I want the font of just revenue column to be red. So as you can see, the conditional formatting for the tables in Data Studio are quite flexible. That's it for the tables. Let's move on to the next chart, time series. Using a time series chart, we can show the changes of the values of the metric over time, and it helps us to see the trends and patterns in the data. Here in this simple example of a time series chart, I'm plotting users over time. But we can also break down the metrics over different categories. For instance, returning visitors versus new visitors. And we can also compare the values to the previous period. Here we can see that during the last 28 days, we had both more new visitors and more returning visitors compared to the 28 days before that. Here's another example of a time series chart. Again, we are plotting users over time, but this time instead of breaking it down per new visitor versus returning visitor, we're breaking it down per device category. So we can see the number of users from desktop, mobile, and tablet. And instead of plotting it daily, so using day as the value for our date range, we are using the week of the year. So we can see the change of the numbers from the first week of the year over to the 52nd week. We are not limited to show only one metric on a time series chart. In this example, I have applied 3 metrics: users, sessions, and page views, and I'm showing them per quarter of the year. If we move the cursor over any of these points, we can see the actual values for that quarter. Here's another example, the same chart, but this time I'm using months as the dimension for the horizontal axis. And finally, it's worth to mention that a time series chart doesn't have to be plotted using lines. We can use bars as well. So here I have users, so we can quickly compare how many users did we have in each quarter of 2018 and compare it with the values for the same quarter in 2017, the year before. So that's basically it for the time series. Let's move to the next chart type, area chart. Area charts are very similar to time series chart, with the difference that they apply a shade of a color to the area underneath each series to show the volume of the data, and that it can stack different series on top of each other. So for example, here, when we see the value of returning visitors, when we are hovering over returning visitors and we see it's close to 2.5K, it doesn't mean that we had more than 2,000 visitors on that day, but it means that the total of new visitors and returning visitors for that day was close to 2,500. And that's because the values are stacked on each other. From here to here is the value for new visitors, and from here to here is the value for returning visitors. This is another example of an area chart. This time we are plotting revenue per month, and we're breaking it down per device category: mobile, desktop, and tablet. And the values are again stacked on top of each other. And as a result, we can see the trend of revenue. So it started at $4,000, and at the end in December, it was close to $8,000. But what if we are not interested in seeing the trend, and instead we're more interested in seeing the distribution of revenue between these different categories? In other words, we don't care about the total, but instead we want to see which device category brings in more revenue compared to the others. To do that, instead of stacking series on top of each other, we can use 100% stacking, which is shown in this chart. Here I'm visualizing the same data set, but this time we're focusing on the distribution of the revenue. So for example, here we can see that in October, desktop was responsible for more than 70% of revenue, while in the months before and after, it was down to around 24% or 34%. And then we can also see the change in the distribution over time. So that's basically it about the area chart. Let's move on to the next chart type, the line chart. The line chart is very similar to the time series, with the difference that with time series chart, we could only have date time dimension for the values on the horizontal x-axis. But with the line chart, we can have any dimension with any type of categories. Here we have countries as the dimension for the x-axis, and we're plotting users and revenue. Now, this is not a good data visualization because it suggests that there is continuity between these different points because they are connected to each other with a line. It suggests that there is a connection between the United States and Canada and United Kingdom, while actually there isn't. This is not a continuous value like time, that this is the day before, this is today, and this is the day after. These are different categories and they are not connected to each other in any way. A better way of visualizing the same data set would be using combo charts. With combo charts, we can have different series represented either as lines or bars. Here I've selected the users to be represented as bars and be plotted against left axis, and revenue to be represented as a blank line and be plotted against right axis. We're not limited to using only 2 metrics on a combo chart either. Here I've added a third metric, sessions, and I've set it to be represented by bars and plotted against the left axis. So with a combo chart, we can add multiple series, multiple metrics, and choose any of them to be represented as bars or lines or be plotted against the right axis or left axis. Plus, we can use any dimensions as our categories over the horizontal axis. So that's basically about combo charts. Let's move on and see the next chart type, bar chart. Bar charts are simple. They use bars to plot the values of one metric or multiple metrics on the y-axis, the vertical axis, and then we can have a category or a dimension applied to the horizontal axis, the x-axis. Here I have users, sessions, and page views by country. Now, if we have just one metric instead of multiple metrics, okay, just like here that we have just users per country, okay, then we can apply a breakdown dimension. So either multiple metrics, or if there is one metric, we can apply a breakdown dimension. Now I have users broken down by new visitors versus returning visitors. So for example, for United States, I can see that during the time frame of the report, I had this many new visitors and this many returning visitors. I cannot see the total of these two numbers. On the next example of a bar chart, I have used a stacked bar chart. Now, instead of the values of a breakdown dimension, new visitors versus returning visitors, be shown side by side, they are stacked on top of each other. So we can see that again, we've had this number of new visitors during the time frame, this number of returning visitors during the same time frame, and here's the total of these two values, more than 300,000 users. Whereas here, we couldn't see that total. We could only see each value plotted against the y-axis, okay? Now there's another category of bar charts, and that's a horizontal bar chart. In the example above, we've had only 6 categories. But there are times that we'd like to visualize more categories, and there's just not enough room for all of them to be shown side by side. In those cases, we could use a horizontal bar chart. Here I have 16 categories. Now again, because I'm just plotting one metric, users, I can apply a breakdown dimension to this chart as well. Let's see how it looks like. This one is the same chart, but now I applied the age range of the user as the breakdown dimension. So the lengths of the horizontal bars are the same, but I can see how many of those were between 35 and 44 years old. How many of those were between 25 and 34 years old, right? And this is called a horizontal stacked bar chart. Now, just like in the example of the area chart, if we are not at all interested in seeing the trend of the users, okay, from California to the rest of the states, and we don't care about the totals, but instead we care about the distribution of the age ranges for each of these states, we can use a stacked bar chart, but with 100% stacking, like this. This one doesn't show us the totals, instead it shows percentages, and we can easily see the distribution, the change of the distribution of age ranges across different US states on this chart. We can easily see that states like California, New York, and DC have the oldest audience, and then Florida has the youngest audience of all. Okay, so that's bar chart. I guess I've bored you enough with different kind of boring chart types. Let's go see one that is a bit more visual. Okay, let's take a break. In the next part of this lesson, we're going to learn how to plot location data using maps, how to use a scatter chart and bubble charts, why it's a good idea to stay away from pie charts, and we're also going to review some more advanced chart types like pivot tables and bullet charts. But that's it for today. I hope you learned something new. Feel free to test your knowledge by taking the quiz for this lesson or continue to the next. You can find both links in the descriptions below. If you're new to Measure School, make sure to subscribe so you can get notified of the future videos that we publish. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.